Previously on Palace of Mirrors. Captured by space pirates and trained by the enigmatic captain of the crew, Darien had grown increasingly uneasy with life aboard the pirate ship. While defending the prisoners on the ship, he killed a pirate named Trollbreath. And now, Palace of Mirrors, Season 1, Episode 15, Bluebeard. Bluebeard stood with his back to Darien, who held a hand over the cut on his face. The bleeding had slowed even as the pain sharpened, but it didn't hurt as much as leaving Cassie and the other two prisoners behind. It didn't hurt as much as the thought of Tom, who believed he would never see his daughter's face again. Darien studied Bluebeard's reflection in the glass of the window. The captain stared out into the murky night sky. Hard lines defined his face. "Have you killed a man before now?" Darien felt cold, as though a sudden wind had swept into the ship. The crack of gunshots whispered in the back of his mind. "Yes." His voice came out rough. "Yes, I've killed before now." Bluebeard's back heaved with a sigh. When he turned, compassion softened those hard lines on his face. He moved with none of his usual grace when he set himself into his chair. He looked like a much older man than Darien had ever guessed. He pulled an unadorned wooden box from a drawer in his desk. "I should have seen." He closed his eye. "If anyone should be able to recognize the eyes of a killer, you would think it would be me." What will you do with me now?" Bluebeard's lips tightened. "You killed a member of my crew. He deserved it." The cold edge in his own voice scared Darien. Bluebeard snapped the box open. A reflective sphere, just large enough to fit in the palm of a hand, rested on red velvet within. For a moment, Darien wondered if it might be some sort of miniature star engine. Bluebeard reached for it, but his fingers curled away at the last moment. His reflection in the sphere did not wear an eye patch. It wept blood from a red hole. Faces, reflections, who we once were and who we have become. He looked up at Darien. "The time has come, I think, to tell you a story. On my world there is a saying, all stories belong to the Palace of Mirrors. The palace lay long broken, mute and inert, when my story began. Still I think of that old saying. Still, I believe it is true. Some things are forever. On my world, these things are remembered even now. And this is a story of my world. This is a story of mine. This is the story of a young boy named Calathorn, who grew up the son of a powerful family. They did not live on an important planet. In the days of the Empire, it meant little to anyone. Less, if you can believe it, than your humble moon. No great wars were fought there. No great captains of the guard grew up in its cities. Space travel still took place between Cal's world and its neighbors, but he had never been allowed to leave its atmosphere. At night, he lay on the balcony outside his room and stared up into the stars, while his mother sang in her room down the hall. He knew every inch of that sky, every star, and all the space between. Tutors taught him history, philosophy, science, and literature. They taught him what he would need to know to someday join the ruling families of his world. He didn't care for their droning voices, and he cared even less for the idea of becoming a part of his planet's government. But when those tutors spoke of the greater universe and the people who had once lived there, Cal's eyes shone. History, with all its adventures and great deeds, woke him from his stupor. His tutors taught him all the known past of that fallen thing around which all our history orbits. From the Empress Talia, first of all the rulers of the Empire, and the finding of the Palace of Mirrors, to the 13 knights who joined their fates to hers, to the forging of the 13 ships of the Imperial Guard, and the conquest that bound the stars one to another, and finally, to the great sundering in blood and fire that broke it all apart. Now when Cal lay on his balcony, he had names for the stars. He could follow the long distant paths of long dead fleets and pinpoint battles long ended. He fell asleep with the night in his heart and dreamed of the stars so distant in time and space. For years he had room in that heart for nothing else. He grew older and abandoned many of the trappings of childhood, but he never forgot those nights beneath the starlit sky. He would not find something else to share his heart with the stars until he turned 15. His father took him on a tour of a major seaport. Great metal ships, ugly and ungainly, choked the docks there. They stirred a deep distaste in Cal, but his father seemed to think he should find them quite fascinating. He kept quoting engine outputs and hold sizes, as though the numbers held all the truth of life. Cal had given up listening and begun to daydream when a sight brought him up short and took his breath from his chest. Wedged between great hunks of metal, powered by nuclear fusion and built from man-made composites that had never known nature's touch, a sailing ship bobbed in the water. Small as a toy and delicate as lace, it creaked as the waves made their way to shore. The wooden ship fit together with such precision, the shape of her hull swept in such lines, she seemed a living thing that had grown from the sea. It took weeks of begging, pleading, threats, and finally interventions from his mother before Cal convinced his father to let him spend a summer on the deck of that ship. There, riding the ocean waves, he learned knots, boredom, and the voice of the wind. He learned the fury of a storm. He learned to see in the stars his place on the sea. I know you've never seen an ocean, but you must picture it to understand my story. Imagine, if you can, water all the way to the horizon and beyond. Imagine waves rolling beneath you, immense as hills and mountains. Imagine water whose color shifts with the time of day, with the weather, with the very mood of the world itself. The wind sculpted Cal's face, and the spray of waves changed the flavor of his skin. Some days, I would give anything to return to that ship. I would. What am I saying? It's gone, Darien. It's all gone. I learned many years later that the ship burned to ashes and blew away on the wind and got swept away by the sea. One late summer day, an 18-year-old Cal sailed into port. He had been sailing every summer, and he had changed from the pale boy who dreamed only of a night sky. He moved with confidence over the deck, carrying out his duties with a practiced ease. He had decided during a ferocious storm that he would reject the position his family wanted him to take on. He would move on to the ship, would care for it, would let himself grow into it as it had grown into him. He looked down from the railing, rehearsing the words he would speak when he walked through the doors of his family's mansion. He looked down from the railing and fell promptly in love. Finely dressed young woman, golden hair like sunset waves, stood on the docks and watched burly men toss fish. Her sharp eyes seemed sure to cut the very fish she watched. Cal rushed down the gangplank to speak with her, all his fancy speeches long forgotten. Fresh from the ship, with sea-tangled hair and sun-bleached clothing, he drew the attention of two large men who wore beautifully etched silver pistols. The bodyguards would not let him near the woman, and before Cal knew what had happened, she had vanished into the crowded docks. He returned home, for the first time in his life not refreshed by his season on the sea. An emptiness gnawed at the edges of his heart, and a fury, as only the young can feel it, filled his chest. His father greeted him curtly and announced that his son would not sail next summer. Instead, Cal would take up a position in the governing cabinet. He also announced that a representative from a neighboring planet was due to arrive for dinner that very night. His eyes scrutinized his son with an intensity that promised, in no uncertain terms, his son would not appear at table as a filthy sailor. Servants pulled knots from his hair and washed the salt of the sea from his skin. They disposed of his clothing with disgusted expressions and dressed him in fine silks in colors so rich they would have given indigestion to all but the most gluttonous. Cal endured, barely aware of what happened to his body in the present. He found himself trapped, as he so often would, in the past. The beautiful woman stood on the docks, her eyes so knowing, her hair the gold of starlight. The more Cal lingered on that moment, the more despondent he became. Would life truly take the seas from him on the same day it took her? He entered the dining room sullen and raw, looked up, and met fate. For so it seemed at the time, in the eyes. She stood before him, and now he could see that her eyes were blue, the blue of a sea at storm. His breath caught, and he nearly missed her introduction. Her name was Arlinda, and as you have no doubt guessed, she was the representative his father had told him about. They fell in love. There's little to tell of it. They shared sunsets, heated conversations that ran deep into the dark of night, dreams, and travels to places near and far. I can see now it was a quiet thing, that love. But in those moments it felt to Cal as though it held a fury, as sure as that of the boundless oceans he knew so well. They married on a space station in orbit around Cal's world. He had never left the confines of his planet before. The stars cut the ink of the never-ending night. They appeared more solid, more real somehow, than the stars of his childhood. But they also appeared so much more cold. They did not warm Cal with memories of his balcony, but brought goosebumps as though a draft had worked its way through a cracked window. His world floated between those stars, and Cal understood for the first time how small a thing it was. Everything he had ever known and loved, save his family and Arlinda, lay below in a sphere he could have held in the palm of his hand. The seas, which had seemed endless from the deck of his ship, from here looked fragile as finely wrought glass. The city where he had grown up, the seat of his world's government, had become little more than a scattering of lights. Cal stood before those quiet lights, holding Arlinda's hands so tight. He kissed her with all the stars for witness. They danced with the white of a hurricane swirling over the ocean below. Arlinda commissioned a home. She built it on a cliff overlooking the ocean her husband so loved. In the mornings they stood together on their balcony and tasted the salt on the air. When Cal closed his eyes, he could almost feel the waves beneath him, ever rolling. Seabirds squalled on the restless wind. When the young couple grew cold with the sea-chilled air, they held one another tight. Cal believed he would live out his days happy, in love, everything he had ever wanted within his grasp. He believed the world had been made for him. He was a fool, but I pity him all the same. He believed these things with all his heart until the day he found the door hidden in the basement. One morning he woke early. He would never know what woke him. Maybe he noticed the chill from the empty spot beside him where Arlinda should have been. He searched the house for her. He went room by room, and room by room he found only shadows. At last, almost panicked, he found her in an out-of-the-way alcove by the basement door. She smiled and said she hadn't been able to sleep, that she had only gone for a walk. She kissed him on the cheek and drew him back to the bedroom. For a while, Cal's doubts vanished into her arms. But as the morning light grew, Cal found his mind caught on a single detail. The basement door, always kept closed at Arlinda's insistence, had been opened just a crack. He tried to ignore the thought. Surely it meant nothing. The door had just been left opened by one of their servants. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not put it out of his mind. So the next day he crept down the creaking stairs. If he had simply wandered down to fetch something, he would never have noticed the trail that led through the thin layer of dust on the floor. He followed it past stacked boxes of long-forgotten clothing and the scattered traces of a well-lived life. An old wardrobe, one Cal had never seen before, wood warped from the damp air, rested against the wall at the end of the trail. The doors creaked open and revealed musty clothing. For a moment, Cal breathed a sigh of relief. Surely Arlinda had simply been looking through her old clothing. Maybe she had sought a well-loved dress from her youth. He could have turned then and walked back upstairs, but instead, he found himself pushing aside the dresses. The back of the wardrobe had been cut out. A door, sturdy steel, had been set into the wall. Cal could not open it, and none of his keys fit the lock. He wandered through the house, numb as he had never been before. His hand trailed the walls past framed photos. Arlinda in her wedding gown, the white sharp against the black of space. A picnic on a day Cal no longer remembered. Arlinda at the tiller of their small sailing boat. Cal, in his formal clothing on the steps to the palace, on his first days as an official working in the bureaucracy. All of these pictures felt as though they had been taken of another family, in another life. That had been a time before he knew the truth, that even in love, there can be secrets. He wanted to ask about the door, but he could never find the words. The sea winds rushed the question from his lips. Arlinda kissed them away at night, and the darkness held them tight. The house shrunk until it seemed the only door lay behind the wardrobe, and every hallway led to the basement steps. Even in the furthest room, 3 stories above the basement, Cal felt as though he stood before that door. It ate him from the inside out, like some kind of an insatiable parasite. It hollowed him and haunted his face, a shadow that those who met him could see, but never quite put their finger on. The only thing that kept him distracted were the terrorist ships that began to attack his world. They had no demands. Day after day they struck, and cities burned. Cal's planet did not have a robust space force, as it had not been involved in a military conflict since the rebellion that ended the Empire. But the terrorists had a preternatural ability to avoid and counter the planetary defenses that did exist. The attacks crescendoed the day Cal learned what lay behind the door. There had been a lull of several days, and Cal had begun to believe that maybe they were through the worst of it. But on that night, Cal woke with a gasp to the sound of explosions. Fire rose against the distant horizon, where the capital sprawled along the coast. He called out in horror, thinking of his parents, but only an uneasy silence answered. It took him a confused moment to understand that Arlinda no longer lay beside him in the bed. It was as though he had stumbled into a mirror house version of the night he had discovered the door. Only now the fire had come to join the dread of the forbidden and foreboding door. Cal raced through the house, gripped with a mad terror, screaming his wife's name. He faltered at the basement steps, fearing the dark for the first time since childhood. But in the end, his mad momentum carried him down into the darkness. He fumbled only a moment with the key, Arlinda's key, that he had copied in a fit of obsession shortly after discovering the door. It fit the lock on the door where his did not. He had never had the courage to use it, but had kept it close at all times. It had been both a comfort and a needle in his side. Narrow steps led down into a natural cavern. Cool air breathed up out of the darkness. Silence, save the steady drip of water, dwelt in that space beneath his home. Cal had never known a more oppressive atmosphere. A boom slaughtered the silence, and lights cracked on. Cal spun to find the source of the sound, and realized that a great steel wall had guillotined down to close him off from the stairs leading up. He saw now that the natural cavern had been fitted with electronic lights, consoles, and even a large view screen. A desk occupied a nook off to one side. It rested on an ornate rug that Cal recognized all too well. It had been a gift from him to Arlinda on their anniversary. The screen displayed his world, as seen from orbit, against the backdrop of stars. Cal beheld it as small and vulnerable as it had seemed on his wedding day. He crept forward. Did I know what was to come? Looking back, it seems impossible that I didn't. But at the time, no. Calathorn didn't know that his entire life was about to change forever and after. All he knew was that he didn't want to be there any longer. All his desire to know the purpose behind the door and this room that lay below it drained from his body. He turned and beat his hands on the steel wall. How cool, the metal against his skin. It did not budge, no matter how hard he pounded, no matter how much he raged, no matter how desperately he prayed. At last he collapsed and lay panting with his back against the wall. He stared at his world, at the blue oceans where he had found his soul as a child, at the green forests he had hiked with his wife, at the city lights where he had worked, and felt a love so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. The screen blinked black, and when it turned back on, his wife stood before him. Her face held such a chill. Even now when I think of her, I feel goosebumps on the back of my neck. I close my eyes, and I'm there again. I'm sitting on that stone floor with that unyielding wall behind me. You should never have seen this. You should have been asleep in your bed. Linda, tell me anything at all, just not that this is true. Her face softened a moment, so brief it lasted for only the shadow of a second. I can't do that. I don't have to lie to you any longer. I won't. You deserve that much. The terrorist attacks were only a distraction, she shrugged. It was always us. I loved you. I thought you loved me. Some days. She looked away and spoke more softly. Some days so did I. You really weren't ever supposed to know. I had hoped you would die never knowing the truth. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for hurting you. This will be over soon. She reached a hand toward the screen. In that moment, I remembered her face as it had looked from the deck of a creaking sailing ship. Arlinda, love, don't do this. You can still stop. You can do the right thing. I know you. I know you're not a bad person. You can't be, not after everything. Please, I beg you, stop. She met my eyes, and I saw not an ounce of the woman I had known and loved. Some things, there is no stopping. The screen went black, and left me alone with nothing but the cold stone. I searched, but found no escape. I tried to use the consoles to call for help, but they didn't respond to my commands. So I waited. I waited and I dreamed. What else could I do? I dreamed of a day I might find Arlinda, 100 things I imagined saying to her. Had she loved me ever? That was the most common. Time passed, and my dreams grew dark. I imagined killing her 100 different ways, my hands around her throat. That was the most common. I fell into a fitful sleep only to be woken by thunder. The whole room shook. A crack ran along one wall and across the ceiling. It widened, darkness spilling from the split stone like blood. It gave with a gasp, and the cavern collapsed. The air filled with dust and fury. How long did I huddle, waiting to die, my ears aching from the incredible sound? Even now, Darien, I hear it. A constant roar, like some great Kraken I'll never be rid of. A dark so complete it bordered on death found me there under tons of stone. Or maybe I found it. I wondered if I had been crushed under falling stone. Was I dead and gone and lost forever? I reached up and felt the boulder above my head. It felt real, solid, more alive than me. I coughed, a hacking, sputtering cough that hurt more than I had known a cough could hurt. In that moment, I knew I must somehow be alive. How long did I lay there in that interminable darkness? How long? I can't say. Time did not exist in that place. Eventually, I began to climb. I did so knowing I might destabilize the freshly fallen stone. Still, I climbed. I rose up out of the rubble, a corpse rising from the grave. Only, I lived, and it was the world I crawled into that lay dead. I couldn't see the sky for the smoke on the air. I know that means nothing to you, but for someone who had been raised as much by the sky as by his own parents, it meant everything. The sun, the stars, and the never-ending deep of the sky, all blotted out by black clouds, thick and heavy. The only light came from my city burning in the distance. The wind blew cold and sharp off the sea. Our home lay about me in charred and scattered remains. I remembered sitting on the porch, Arlinda's head on my shoulder, and the sea murmuring softly. I remembered laughing with her in the kitchen the day I burned our dinner so badly the house belched smoke. I remembered a fight we'd had over some unimportant thing in the living room. Fists shaken, tears cried, voices echoing between the walls. All of it gone. I turned from my house and walked toward the city. The flames climbed up the scorched sky, and I wondered if my parents still lived. I wondered if my childhood home still stood, the home with the balcony, where I had spent so many nights staring up into the stars, dreaming of a better life, a life of adventure and freedom. After all those nights, what had the stars brought me in the end? Fire, smoke, death, betrayal. Yes, that is what the stars brought, more than anything. They had brought me a heart to break, and a home to burn, and a love to prove false. I picked my way through the ruins of starships and skyscrapers. Once they had soared, but now they lay broken. Limp hands poked up through the rubble. Body parts lay strewn about, haphazard in their arrangement. I would have wept had they looked real. In any other context, I would have sworn they were props from a movie. No, the body parts didn't bring tears, but the living cut me deep. They shambled, dazed and aimless. Their eyes were glass, just glass. I remember thinking, is that what I look like? Am I glass? My childhood home did still stand, and my parents still lived, but I would never see them alive again. When I arrived home, I found it surrounded with troops bearing the insignia of Arlinda's world, I had no choice but to flee. When they couldn't find my body, they searched for me. But I knew my world. I knew it well. I thought to raise my people in rebellion. Every night, in damp basements and cramped attics, I dreamed of the day when I could go home. Time passed, and I gathered some to my cause. We managed a few small guerrilla strikes, but our Linda did not remain idle. She rebuilt the city. She fed the people. She gave them safety and prosperity. In return, they gave her their love. Every night I found fewer people willing to take me in. Every day I found fewer willing to fight. The day she executed my family, something inside me, deeper than I had known my body went, gave out. Time died the day my parents hung. It was as though I lay still in the darkness beneath our home. I drifted, a man without a place or a time or a purpose, like the wreckage of a ship on the ocean waves. Years later, I lay sprawled on the docks. I wore only rags. Waves crashed, and I wondered. What would it be like to become the sea, fluid and free, ancient and unknowing, filled with life and yet having none myself. You must understand, I was very drunk. I had been very drunk for years. A man, face rough as pitted stone, tripped over my body and cursed my existence. The knife he pulled had a dull sheen, but there was nothing dull about the edge. For a moment I imagined letting him slit my throat. Maybe he would toss my corpse into the sea. Let it all end. Let me become the sea. I blinked, and when my eyes opened, he lay gasping on the dock below me, red bubbling from a smile in his throat. I held his knife in shaking hands and felt the sticky warmth of his blood drip down the blade onto my fingers. Why did I save myself? Who can say? Maybe I just wasn't drunk enough to die that day. An old man with a wild gray beard and a robotic leg limped up to me, a wide grin on his face. He looked me up and down. There's more to this drunkard than meets the eye. I'd wager money on it, I would. He rubbed his hands. I admire the fight in you. Still, that was my man whose blood you stand in. Leave me alone, I threatened him with the knife. The old man laughed and pulled out a long sword, just slightly curved, and not a part of it dull. If you come with me, lad, I can promise you adventure and wealth. You're a pirate. Aye. You have a starship? I don't sail the seas for plunder, if that's what you're asking. Yes, I have a starship. He gestured to the starport. Make me a promise and I'll join your crew. I don't have to promise you anything. His face darkened. You murdered a member of my crew. I'd be within my rights to split you where you stand. He shrugged and nudged the corpse with his boot. Still, I wasn't terribly fond of the man, and I could use a good fighter. What is it you want? I wanted only a single thing. I wanted to destroy our Linda. I wanted her not just erased, but forgotten. That's what I wanted. And eventually, that's what I got. Of course, there was a price. I wonder, would I have still joined him if I knew what the cost would be? Who can say? Only the Palace of Mirrors, and it keeps its secrets. Next episode, Bluebeard promises that Darien will face justice for the death of Trollbreath, but continues Darien's training in the hopes that he can survive the coming trial. Thank you for listening to Palace of Mirrors. If you liked the show, please give it a 5-star rating on your platform of choice, and share it with anyone you know who might enjoy it. I truly appreciate it. This podcast was produced, written, and narrated by Matthew Lindquist, with music by Nature's Eye on Pixabay.